Married to a vegetative man, the rich mother-in-law said, give birth to a child and get $1 million. Just as I was fulfilling the contract, my vegetative husband actually woke up. The day Mrs. Butler brought me to the villa, the conditions were already discussed. Her son, Justin Butler, became a vegetative man due to a car accident. Ding! Wisnovel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Mrs. Butler took my hand and said sincerely, April, the doctor has checked, and although Justin was in a vegetative state, his sexual function was not affected. As long as you can give birth to Justin's child, one child will be worth $1 million, and I will pay on the spot. After saying that, Mrs. Butler took me to Justin's bedroom. His bedroom was clearly carefully selected, facing the sun. The sunlight poured in from the window, shining on Justin's distinct face, and I instantly fell for him. Oh my, this vegetative man is too handsome. If it weren't for the fact that he is in a vegetative state now, I might never have had a chance to meet this handsome man. Mrs. Butler continued, you have also seen Justin's condition, April. You need to take the initiative in this matter. Vegetative people also have desires, it's up to you to arouse his desires. If you have no experience, I can recommend 2 movies to you. Blushing, I waved my hands repeatedly and said, No need, Mrs. Butler. I will take care of Justin. After Mrs. Butler finished her instructions, she went back to the company, leaving me alone in this huge villa. After Mrs. Butler left, I came to the bedside and looked at the sleeping Justin. With deep double eyelids, a high nose bridge, and thin lips, judging from his appearance, he must be a very charming man. I picked up Justin's hand and played with it, and as Mrs. Butler said, there was no reaction at all. After a while, feeling bored, I started wandering around this big villa until dinner time. After dinner, the nanny brought a big red blanket, indicating that I should start tonight. Tonight, so soon? The temptation of $3 million was placed in front of me. Although I was in a hurry, I told myself that I didn't have to rush. Miss Fox, do you have any questions? Mrs. Butler said that from now on, you will live with the young master until you get pregnant and give birth to a child. Seeing that I was hesitating, the nanny said, No question. I waved my hand and quickly dismissed the nanny. After the nanny left, I looked at Justin on the bed and hesitated. Although I really wanted those $3 million, in my 24 years of life, I have always been single. Suddenly lying next to a stranger, I couldn't really let go. Thinking about the contract I signed with Mrs. Butler, the sooner I get pregnant and give birth to a child, the sooner I can take the money and leave. I mustered up the courage and opened the closet to change into my pajamas. But when I opened the closet, I was stunned. What are these? Inside the closet, there were rows and rows of all kinds of sexy clothes. Didn't Mrs. Butler know that no matter what, her son couldn't see anything? Parents in the world are so pitiful. I still changed into a relatively conservative nightgown and slowly walked to the bedside. Seeing that Justin on the bed had no reaction, I still hesitated. In the end, I convinced myself. What could a vegetative man do? I don't have to be afraid of him. I hurriedly lifted the blanket and got in. I didn't notice that the moment I got into the bed, Justin's eyelids trembled twice. After lying on the bed, I started to have second thoughts. I'm already 24 years old, of course. I know that having a child is not something that can be accomplished by 2 people lying in the same bed. There must be deeper body communication. But how can I do that thing with a vegetative man? Mrs. Butler said that Justin also has desires. Thinking of this, my gaze involuntarily glanced his legs. It was blocked by the blanket, and I couldn't see anything. I tentatively reached up my hand and touched Justin's face. Wow, it's quite smooth, even better than my own skin. On a whim, I followed Justin's eyebrows, touched his high nose bridge, and then his rough Adam's apple. Oh my God, it feels so good. I can imagine how strong Justin was before becoming a vegetative man. As I was touching, I felt a bit of heat. Stop it, April Fox. If you continue, you won't be able to control yourself. I forced myself to withdraw my hand and clear my mind to sleep. Halfway through sleeping, I thought that Justin is already my husband, so I snuggled up in his arms and fell asleep with my eyes closed. In the hazy midnight, I had a dream. I was gently kissed by a handsome man. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had been run over by a train. Thinking about last night's dream, my face turned red in an instant. At this moment, I was extremely grateful that Justin Butler was in a vegetative state and couldn't see this scene. Otherwise, how would I face him in the future? After serving breakfast to Justin, Mrs. Butler called me. "April, how are you feeling after last night? Did anything happen between you and Justin?" This is just too straightforward. Although I knew that Justin couldn't hear, I still covered my phone and quietly answered by the window. "It's fine, but things didn't progress as quickly. I still need some time." Mrs. Butler understood and said, "I see. You guys may be a bit reserved with each other. Don't worry, I'll arrange something for you tonight." After speaking, Mrs. Butler hung up the phone. "Wait, what arrangement?" "Mrs. Butler, you didn't finish your sentence." Because of Mrs. Butler's words, I anxiously waited the whole day. In the evening, I finally got the arrangement Mrs. Butler mentioned. The nanny came in with a projector, pulled down all the curtains in our bedroom, turned on the projection, and even set up mood lighting. The video on the screen was not suitable for description. "Miss Fox, Mrs. Butler said for you to study it carefully, practice it in person, and also submit a practical report tomorrow morning." After speaking, the nanny left and thoughtfully locked the door. Study and practice in person? And also submit a report? Did Mrs. Butler take it too far? I turned my head and glanced at Justin. In the dim mood lighting, Justin closed his eyes. His distinct features now appeared softer, and his handsome facial features had a fatal attraction. Just one glance made my face turn red, my ears heat up, and my heart beat faster. I wanted to turn off the video, but then I realized that the nanny had taken the remote control when she left. I had no choice but to go back to the bed and sit next to Justin. At this moment, Justin was still lying quietly on the bed, seemingly unaffected by all of this. Thinking about the practice Mrs. Butler mentioned, I made up my mind. I would have to go through this sooner or later. Have a child early, get the money, and leave early. With this in mind, I gathered my courage and lay down next to Justin. I clumsily kissed him, imitating what I saw in the video. In a daze, he seemed to tremble for a moment, but when I looked again, he was still lying there with his eyes closed, peacefully asleep. Perhaps it was just an illusion. Just as I was torn between advancing and retreating, suddenly, all the lights in the villa went out and the projector stopped. It turned out to be a power outage. I stopped abruptly and calmed down. The sparse moonlight shone in, enveloping his face, casting a silhouette beneath his long eyelashes. "Will you think I'm cheap, selling myself to have a child for $1 million? I chuckled self-deprecatingly, not knowing why, but on this moonlit night, in front of a vegetative patient, I suddenly wanted to vent all my grievances. I grew up in a poor family, and my parents favored boys over girls. I even had to borrow money from them to go to high school. No one would believe that it is already 2023, and there are still girls living in such misery, but that's me. Through my own efforts, I managed to get into a good university. But my parents refused to support me anymore. Fortunately, I was able to apply for a student loan. So, I worked part-time while studying, and finally completed my university education. While other girls were embarking on their life journeys, I was already burdened with debts, from my parents and the student loan. After graduation, it wasn't easy for a girl like me, without a wealthy background, to find a job. After 2 years of struggling, I finally made some progress. But then my grandmother fell ill, and it would cost hundreds of thousands to treat her. My parents didn't want to take care of my grandmother and just let her fend for herself. But my grandmother is the only person who has shown me warmth since I was a child. I couldn't abandon her. So, I used all the money I had to pay the hospital. And day and night, I took care of my grandmother until the hospital demanded payment and I couldn't produce a single penny. That's when I met Mrs. Butler, who solved my life's dilemma. As long as I give birth to the child, I will get the money to treat my grandmother, and she can continue to be with me. That's why I need this $1 million, and I need to get it as soon as possible. My grandmother's illness cannot be delayed. Tears streamed down my face, hot and scalding, dripping onto Justin's arm. His fingers moved involuntarily. The next morning, I was still in Justin's embrace. Afraid of numbing his arm, I quickly got up and gave him an arm massage. At this moment, Mrs. Butler called. "April, did anything happen last night?" I blushed and stammered, I still need some more time." Mrs. Butler sounded a bit impatient. "Still haven't learned? Do you need someone to teach you this?" My face turned red. Seeing me hesitating, Mrs. Butler gave a direct order. "Send me an 800 words practice report." She hung up after speaking. She truly is a formidable CEO. Getting things done swiftly. I turned to look at Justin, wearing a mournful expression. "How could your mother be like this?" "I have to write an 800 words report about this. Are you sure it's a practice report and not an erotic story?" Blushing throughout, I racked my brains to turn last night's events with Justin into a short report and sent it to Mrs. Butler. There's no other way, money is hard to come by, and I have to follow the rules when accepting someone's payment. 3 minutes later, Mrs. Butler replied with 9 simple words. "There is progress, but the details still need improvement." Indeed, she is a powerful CEO, always efficient. Since that night when I opened up to Justin and told him about my past, I have felt a closer connection to him from the bottom of my heart. Perhaps it's because he is in a vegetative state and it gives me peace of mind. Every night, lying next to him, I would talk to him about many things. My own stories, other people's stories, even a cloud I spotted in the sky during the day, I would instinctively share them with him. Unconsciously, I have become more and more dependent on Justin. If I don't see him for a moment, I actually miss him. I pat my own face, telling myself, "April Fox. Be more clear-headed. He's just a vegetative person." But I can't control myself from growing closer to Justin from the bottom of my heart. So, I proposed to the nanny to take over the task of bathing Justin every night. After all, I am already his wife. The main reason is that Mrs. Butler has done so much for me. My grandmother was also arranged to be hospitalized by Mrs. Butler, so I should repay her. However, ideals are beautiful, but reality is cruel. Before this, I never thought that bathing Justin would face such a predicament. I wiped Justin's hands and face clean, but then I hesitated about what to do next. Looking at Justin, I couldn't help but swallow nervously. "Justin, I am your wife. What I am doing now is within the scope of a wife's responsibilities. Please don't blame me." I reassured myself and explained to Justin, who is in a vegetative state, before finally extending my hand. I don't know if it's because the room temperature is too high or what, but I seem to see a blush on his face. Seeing this scene, I suddenly remembered the agreement I signed with Mrs. Butler. If I fulfill the contract now, will I be able to quickly get that 1 million? Thinking of this, my gaze towards Justin became much more intense, but I didn't notice that his eyelids twitched twice, as if they were about to open. My breathing quickened and I reached out to touch his body. "Forget it, April Fox, taking advantage of someone's vulnerability is not your style." A battle between angels and demons played out in my mind. I took a deep breath, quickly washed Justin, and then quickly covered him with the blanket. After getting used to all of this, I felt even more relaxed facing Justin. On this day, after taking a shower and blowing my hair half dry, I wrapped myself in a towel and returned to the bedroom. When I bent over, the towel accidentally fell off. My first reaction was to pick up the towel, but then I remembered that Justin is in a vegetative state and he can't see anything. So I threw the towel aside and ignored it. While tidying up the blanket for Justin, I accidentally touched him and found that tonight his muscles were particularly tense, and felt his body was very hot all over. Perhaps it's because the weather has turned hot and the temperature has risen. Even vegetative people can feel restless. At this moment, I received a call from the hospital. "Miss April, your grandmother's condition is not good. She needs to have surgery as soon as possible. It would be best if you could raise enough money for the operation as soon as possible." I panicked for a moment and quickly called Mrs. Butler. I begged Mrs. Butler while crying, asking if she could transfer the money to me first so that I could use it for my grandmother's surgery. I promised that I would get pregnant for Justin as soon as possible. On the other end of the line, Mrs. Butler sighed. "April, don't worry. I am at the hospital right now. You can rest assured that I will cover the cost of your grandmother's surgery. We can deduct it from that 1 million when you get pregnant." I am sending a driver to pick you up and take you to the hospital." I didn't expect that my task was not yet completed. Mrs. Butler not only arranged for my grandmother to be hospitalized, but also covered the cost of the surgery for us. I couldn't express my gratitude enough and could only go to the hospital with the driver for now to see my grandmother.